Hello, my name is Sandra. I'm a senior here at Sleepy Hollow, and I would like to welcome all of you listeners to Sleepy Hollow Radio's first edition of The Interview. Today, I am especially excited to introduce our first guest, Mr. Mondaire Jones, our soon-to-be congressman for New York's 17th Congressional District. He was born in Nyack and raised in Spring Valley by a single mother. Even with his hard upbringing, he had a mother that always told him to dream big, no matter the circumstances. He went on to gain acceptance into Stanford University in 2009, graduating with a bachelor's degree, and Harvard Law School in 2013. And now he'll be representing both his home and us. Welcome, Mr. Jones, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It is such a pleasure to be speaking to young people. It's a reminder of when I got my start in politics as a high school freshman at Spring Valley High School across the Hudson River.
Yeah. Okay, especially growing up in Section 8 housing in Rockland County, you know that there are areas in Congressional District 17 that do not match the wealth of others. There are people that are thriving financially, and there are people still in need of government assistance no matter how hard they work. So, my question is, what are your plans for addressing the wealth gaps that exist in the district?
You know, it's a great question, and it's something that's really personal for me. As you noted, I watched as my mom struggled, even with the help of the government, and had to work multiple jobs just to put food on the table for us and to cover the cost of housing that wasn't fully covered by Section 8. And so one of the things that we need is to make sure that we are giving everyone an opportunity to succeed. That means fully funding our public schools so that people have a greater likelihood of overcoming humble beginnings and going on to get the kinds of educational opportunities in college and in law school that I was able to get. It also means that we have to make housing more affordable for people, especially in this district where it is extremely expensive to live. That means investing in building more affordable housing throughout our district. It means also making sure that we make childcare more affordable. It's why I propose universal childcare. The average cost of childcare for a family of four in this district is over $2,100 a month. So those are some structural changes that we can do to make the cost of living cheaper for people. We also know that the way we're going to need to fund some of these things is to make the really wealthy people in our society pay more in taxes, which is to say pay their fair share in taxes, so that we can fund essential government services, especially in the middle of the economic challenges that we're facing right now because of COVID, people being out of work, over 40 million people having lost their jobs in the course of 10 weeks. We have to be investing in creating jobs and also making sure that people get the cash assistance that they need to live.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you're so right. Like, it's one thing to have equality, but it's another thing to have equity, which I hear is something really, really big that you're focusing on. So, we live in a society that's really focused on the individual. So it's important, especially during a time like this, that we not only address our needs, but the needs of others and how they connect to ours. So I guess my question is setting up mutual aid in the district like a plan of yours, or tell me about it?
Yeah, tell me about what you mean by mutual aid, because mutual aid, one example of that is what I did on the campaign during the Democratic primary, which is when COVID happened, we asked our volunteers to call people and see what they needed.
Yes.
From what those folks needed from their neighbors who were calling them.
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. Just like community coming together, the ones that are like more fortunate than others, and just kind of putting money together and giving to the people who are less fortunate. So yeah, I heard about the thing that you did, and that was really good.
And let me be clear that this should not fall on my good Samaritans to get us out of the economic devastation that we're facing right now. This is the role of government, and government should be stepping up to do this. And unfortunately, under this president and some of his enablers in Congress, we have not seen the government do what it should be doing to help the people it represents.
You're so right. Yeah. So I'm going to take it over to another student, and he's going to ask you some questions.
Hi, Congressman Jones. My name is Sam Leviathan, and I'm a rising junior here at Sleepy Hollow High School. So across the country, we are seeing more progressives running in local elections, and they're upsetting their longtime incumbents in the Democratic primaries. In 2018, AOC beat Joe Crowley, the 10-term incumbent, and Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar were also elected. Then, as we're seeing it play out this year, more progressives such as yourself, Jamal Bowman, Richie Torres, Marie Newman, Cori Bush, and the list goes on, are also winning in the primaries in areas where centrists have dominated the ballots for 15 to up to 30 or so years. Do you believe this movement is reaching one extreme on the political pendulum of national zeitgeist, or is it the beginning of a new, unfettered wave of democratic socialism in America?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can you repeat the very last part of what you said, because I want to make sure I'm answering the right question there. I'm not hearing you too well, frankly.
Oh, sorry. So, do you believe this movement is reaching one extreme on the political pendulum of national zeitgeist, or is it the beginning of a new, unfettered wave of democratic socialism in America?
Yeah, I don't think it's either. I don't think it's extreme to want everybody to have health care in the richest nation in the history of the world, and for everyone to be able to to afford to have a roof over their heads. I think what is extreme is the status quo, which is a status quo that says that if you are wealthy and well connected, then you are living extremely comfortably. And if you're Jeff Bezos, for example, you are making nearly $100 billion even in the course of this pandemic. And so you are profiting off of the suffering of others, and because we have a market that favors, the rich and really disadvantages working class folks like the family I grew up in and like most Americans. So I think what we are seeing is a rebalancing of priorities in service of the American people. To me, that's not called democratic socialism, and it's not extremism. It is a move towards representation for the people, by the people. And it's why I'm so proud to be part of this progressive movement to make sure that everyone's life is able to be improved through big structural changes.
Yeah, definitely. And I really hear what you're saying about like restructuring and how we need representation by the actual people, because that's very important. Now, I have a second question for you, because in the midst of the global pandemic, we are seeing how our healthcare system is fraught with problems. So how would the type of Medicare for All plan that you've proposed have better prepared us for the novel coronavirus, and how would the nation's response have differed if it wasn't in place instead of our current failing system?
Medicare for All is the only healthcare policy that would literally ensure everyone. And again, we are living in the richest nation in the history of the world, and other developed societies do precisely this, except us. Even before COVID-19, there were 87 million people in this country who were either uninsured or underinsured, meaning they had some coverage, but the cost was still a barrier to getting necessary medical care. That problem has become exacerbated in the midst of this global pandemic that people are comparing to the 1918 Spanish flu. And that's a shame. As I look at the disproportionately high rate of deaths from COVID-19 infections in the Black and Hispanic communities in particular, that is due to the greater prevalence of underlying illnesses, making people more susceptible to succumbing to COVID-19. How is it that there is a greater prevalence of underlying illnesses like asthma and diabetes, for example, in the Black and Hispanic communities? It is because healthcare in this country, which as of now is conditioned on your ability to pay for it, your personal wealth, disproportionately is unavailable to Black and Hispanic people. And so I support Medicare for All, like I said, the only healthcare policy that would ensure everybody. And we would not have seen the kinds of disparities in impact in the Black and brown communities in this country, and also including right here in New York 17th congressional district. and also the disproportionate impact on low-income communities. Now, of course, Medicare for all would be cheaper than what we're currently anticipated to pay over the next 10 years. We would actually save at least $5 trillion because we would get private insurance companies out of the business of artificially inflating the cost of care, and we would do things like cap the cost of prescription drugs annually to $200. I'm someone who watched as his grandmother had to work well past the age of retirement just to pay for the high cost of prescription drugs and medical procedures that are not fully covered by Medicare as we know it. And under Medicare for all, there will be no co-pays and deductibles. I'm someone who's currently unemployed, and it's just the unfortunate part of running for office that you have to quit your job and campaign full time at the level of Congress anyway. And my deductible is like $4,000. I mean, that means I have to come out of pocket to pay up to $4,000 before my insurance really starts to kick in, which I'm also paying out of pocket, many hundreds of dollars every month. It's shameful that people who are unemployed will be expected to cover that kind of cost, and we have to do something about it in a civilized society.
Yeah, it definitely is shameful. And speaking of unemployment, we are also experiencing an economic disaster where millions are losing their jobs. With their job benefits go things such as healthcare. So, like you were saying, since you're unemployed, that has to come out of pocket. So how will you work to abolish healthcare as a job benefit and make it just a human right detached from employers and employment so that everyone can get it regardless of their employment status?
You have to build a movement of people like what I'm doing right now, like what I think this interview is doing, and getting my message out to people. People who are going to vote out folks who should be supportive of Medicare for all, and replace them with people who are going to fight for the kinds of things that would improve the lives of everybody in this country, the kinds of policies that would ensure that everyone. And I think you're seeing that right now with Corey Bush winning the Democratic nomination in Missouri, with Jamal Bowman winning just one district south of mine, down in New York's 16th congressional district, with AOC. And we know that it's not enough just to pay lip service to it. You have to be advocating for these things. You have to sign on to legislation. You have to be withholding your support from legislation that could be better if leadership would just do the right thing. And so it's about bringing that kind of energy too, in addition to this being right on the substantive policy of it. It's how hard are you fighting for these things?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mr. Jones. It's been really an honor asking you these questions. I'm going to give it back to Sandra, who's going to introduce our next.
Okay, so just give us 3 seconds.
It's an honor to speak with you.
Just give us 3 seconds while we rotate the speakers. But I agree so much with you. Like, the Black Lives Matter movement, like, asking for Black lives to matter is the bare minimum. Asking for people to have the right to good health is the bare minimum. So I definitely agree that it's not extreme at all.
I'm so sorry. I cannot hear anything you just said.
Oh, you can't hear me? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you a little bit.
What about now?
I heard you a lot better. I heard you a lot better when you were first asking the questions earlier in this meeting.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. But as I was saying before, asking for Black Lives to matter is the bare minimum. And asking for all of us to have the right to good health is the bare minimum. So you're definitely right, saying that it's not in any way extreme at all. But I would like to welcome another student.
Hi, my name is Amir Lane, and I'm a rising senior here at Sleepy Hollow High School. The LGBTQIA+ community, primarily trans and gender nonconforming people, face discrimination, inequality, and injustice in District 17. Though we've come a long way with positive.
I can't hear you very well. I'm so sorry. Did something happen between the beginning of this interview in terms of the technology you were using, or?
Yeah, we're having a little bit of some technical difficulties.
The LGBTQ+ community, specifically trans and gender nonconforming people, face discrimination, inequality, and injustice in District 17. Though we've come a long way with positive change for the community, LGBTQ folks still deal with unsettling amounts of prejudice today. Not only do they deal with discrimination in the workforce, at school, and wherever they go on a day-to-day basis, but also suffer hate crime. From 2013 to 2020, over 1,000 trans and gender nonconforming people have been killed worldwide. 26 trans and gender nonconforming people have been killed this year alone in America. What plans might you have to help and protect LGBTQ plus people from discrimination in District 17?
We have to. This is personal for me. I grew up not even feeling comfortable coming out as gay because I was so worried that the people in my community and in America writ large would not be accepting. And I'm so pleased to see the progress that we've made, even in recent years. Of course, if elected, I'd be the first openly gay black member of Congress in the 243-year history of the United States. And I'm so energized whenever I hear messages from people young and old who are saying that I have inspired them to accept who they are and live their truths, which I know in many places in this country, including in New York 17th Congressional District, actually, depending on the circumstances, is still a great challenge. And so we have to continue to do the cultural work in terms of making sure that American culture is accepting of members of the LGBTQ plus community, and the policy work, which actually do relate to each other. When we pass the Equality Act, which I fully expect to pass in the year 2021, it will enshrine protections for the LGBTQ plus community in our federal anti-discrimination law, in housing, in employment, in education, which is something that does not yet exist in our federal anti-discrimination law. And that is going to move the culture. It's already the case that most people think it's ridiculous that you can fire somebody for being gay, for example. And of course, the Supreme Court, just a month ago, made a surprise ruling that says that you can't really do this under the law. But we have to make sure it's clear in our federal anti-discrimination law. It shouldn't be left up to the Supreme Court to interpret statutes from, 50 to 60 years ago, and leave our civil rights up to 5 members on a 9-person court. And we also, I think, need to be making sure that when we are having conversations with people and they're saying things that are ignorant, whether it's at the family dinner table or in the workplace or among friends, even when people are joking or they think that they're joking, that we call them out for the language that they use, for the way that they might rationalize discrimination. And representation also matters, right? So for me, I've already been able to change the impressions of people in my family and in my broader community about being LGBTQ plus, and basically showing people through a real life example that I'm the same person that they always knew, and that I should be able to love who I love, and that is also very powerful. So hopefully my being a member of Congress will help to inspire other people to be public with who they are too.
Thank you. I have a second question for you as well. The student debt crisis has been a vital issue for people living in District 17. Thousands of District 17's college graduates can't afford to rent or buy their own homes and end up living with their parents or legal guardians. In the U.S., the student loan debt is $1.6 trillion, surpassing credit card debt and car loans. Student repayment schedules can span up to decades, leaving college graduates with monthly payments. What are some plans you might have for availing or absolving the student debt crisis?
Yeah, and now nationally, the student debt crisis has reached $1.7 trillion. And as you noted, thousands of young people in this district, in Westchester and Rockland counties, are living at home with their parents and their grandparents because they can't afford to be out on their own, owning a home in the way that their parents were able to do, or renting an apartment. And we know that home ownership in our country is the single biggest generator of wealth. So we have an entire generation of people who are shut out of this economy. And I think that we need to liberate them. I'll also make the observation that wages have been stagnant for decades as the cost of college has soared, right? So in 1990, the average the average debt for college debt for someone graduating a 4-year university was about $9,000. In approximately 2017, it was like $37,000. So wages have been stagnant even when you adjust for inflation for decades. The college debt has quadrupled, and we haven't gotten any more relief from government on that. So we have to make sure, from our perspective, that we are forgiving college debt, and that we are pairing that college debt forgiveness with a program that will provide tuition-free public colleges and universities, so that moving forward, no one has to make the crazy decision about whether they're going to take on crippling, massive student debt versus getting something that's required for the vast majority of good-paying jobs in our economy, which is a college education. So it's why I support forgiving college debt and moving forward during tuition-free public colleges and universities.
Thank you so much for that. I completely agree with you. For our next questions, I'd like to welcome another student.
Hello, Mr. Jones. My name is Michael Rosario. I'm a rising senior at Sleepy Hollow High School. Knowing about some of your points of views on different topics, I would just like to ask a question regarding your childhood experiences. I'm aware that you went through some rough times at home from a young age. You experienced problems with the childcare system, the healthcare system, and student debt firsthand. Now, I would just like to ask, how did these experiences shape your views in our society?
You know, I'm running for Congress because, for me, policy is personal. And, you know, I've mentioned that I grew up in Section 8 housing and on food stamps, and my young single mom still had to work multiple jobs to put food on the table for us. But the other thing is that she got help raising me from my grandparents. My grandfather was a janitor, and my grandmother cleaned homes. And when daycare was too expensive, as it is for millions of Americans, including thousands right here in New York 17th District, my grandmother had to take me to work with her. And of course, now I get to run to represent the same people whose homes I watched my grandmother clean while accompanying her to work. But I also want to join this fight for universal child care because I don't want any kid to have to go through what I went through when I was growing up. No kid should have to accompany their guardian to work because child care is too expensive. And it is a need I know to exist firsthand, just like the need for a $15 minimum wage, watching my mom have to work multiple jobs, even with government assistance. You know, I'm part of a generation that's going to inherit a planet that will be devastated by climate change, like all of you listening to this and interviewing you today. And so the Green New Deal is personal for me. It is the only thing that comes close to averting climate catastrophe and ensuring a livable future for my generation and your generation. And so these, and let me also say, in the midst of the Black Lives Matter movement, I don't think it's any surprise that I was the only candidate talking about policing reform in a crowded 8-person Democratic primary before the death of the murder, of George Floyd. And so, you know, again, I bring my experiences in this regard as a black man in America, and that will inform the policymaking process in Washington, D.C. So, you know, so those are some of the ways my experiences bring me a sense of urgency and an understanding of how our laws and how our government every day impacts the daily lives of marginalized people.
Yeah, I agree 100%, Mr. Jones. Thank you so much. Now, enough of those silly questions that we've been asking, my peers have been asking. I have 5 very important questions that I would just like to ask you, if you don't mind.
Yeah, let's do them rapid fire.
All right, awesome. Who is your favorite musician?
Ooh, my favorite musician. Can this be? You know, my favorite musician.
It could be a band, a group, or just, you know, like one single artist.
You know, I'll give you my favorite band. My favorite music group is Boyz II Men.
I love that group. Love that group too. All right, what is your favorite movie?
I'm sorry, say that again.
What is your favorite movie?
Favorite movie is Terminator 2: Judgment Day.
Nice. What is your favorite food?
My favorite food is Ethiopian food, and I have been trying to get Ethiopian food for the past few days without driving into Manhattan. I know that there's a restaurant in Mount Kisco, but I'm not sure if it was open this past weekend.
Oh, nice. I've actually never tried that before. I definitely got to check it out then.
It's great.
Fourth question is, what's your favorite ice cream flavor?
Favorite ice cream flavor is, oh man, it's between strawberry and cookies and cream. I'm gonna go with strawberry.
Strawberry, nice. Last question. If your campaign had a theme song, what would it be?
Oh man. All right, so I have something in mind. I'm gonna go with All of the Lights by Rihanna and Kanye.
Like that choice, Mr. Jones. All right, thank you so much for asking us or answering these questions. I'll give it back to Sandra.
Thank you, Mikey, for those very serious questions. So now I have one question just to wrap everything up. And again, I apologize, Mr. Jones, for taking up your time. I know you're so busy. So I know you've been attending and speaking at many Black Lives Matter protests. And in that, you've been interacting with a lot of youth. You've heard their grievances and you've heard their demands. You've seen how many youth leaders have stepped up and are working to make change. My question is, how will you work with them in achieving their goals, especially with the amount of youth-led organizations that are popping up right now?
You know, I think of the fact that John Lewis was 23 years old when he spoke at the March on Washington, that he was 25 when he crossed that Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, and risked his life on what became known as Bloody Sunday, which led to the enactment of the Voting Rights Act, which has been the most impactful civil rights legislation in history in this country. And I think, understand that young people have always been at the helm of our social movements in this country. And I'm going to be reaching out and interacting with youth through social media events like Instagram Live, where people can ask me any questions that they may have of me. Facebook and Twitter and that kind of thing. I think many of you have already seen them far more active on Twitter than other people who are going to be members of Congress or already in Congress. And so I think just using the platforms, the social media platforms, and also making sure that we have systems in which young people can participate to have a direct line to me and my team is going to make a big difference.
Thank you so much for that. Wow, you're one of the most youth-involved politician I've ever talked to. So I have a follow-up question. So
yeah, well, I'm sorry, but I actually have to go.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you so much. I hope we can speak to you again. Thank you so much for coming. Yeah. Bye.
No problem. Thank you.
That was honestly a really great interview, I'll admit that. And Mondaire is kind of like my inspiration, Getting to talk to him was really amazing, so I'm thankful for that.
That was a really great interview. Even though I couldn't be a part of it, I feel very refreshed listening to it. It's great to hear his perspectives and having you guys ask him all those good questions.
Mm-hmm. Well, now that you're here, Saya, I really liked his talk about government assistance and how that needs to be at a much higher level than it already is at.
Right.
And, I more of a mutual aid type of a gal, but I really kind of saw a different perspective talking to him.
Definitely. I think especially hearing him speak on his family's experiences when he's younger and now as a politician, it definitely makes sense how clear his position is on the government needs to be providing aid. It's just unfortunate that we haven't seen that, especially during these times, for low-income communities of color, especially as he's saying, people are really struggling
exactly
right now. And in our community, we're seeing that, but we're also seeing on the other side of town, we're seeing the rich people still living very comfortably, perhaps even more comfortably than they would have been in comparison. So I think what you were talking about with mutual aid, especially where we live, there's a big potential.
Exactly. Very big potential. I mean, Westchester, District 17, this is the best place you could possibly set up a mutual aid.
Absolutely.
The richest and the poorest. And I really like what he said, representation for the people, by the people. And honestly, like, as unfortunate as it is, the minority communities get represented the least amount.
Absolutely.
And I just feel like if they were to receive some type of assistance, whether it be from the local government or their the people living around them,
exactly,
that would give them more incentive to want to get involved and stuff like that.
And that absolutely ties into mutual aid, because the idea with that is the community helping the community out, because we're all aware of our needs, the needs of our neighbors, and if we can work together to make sure that the representation is more equitable,
exactly,
and that the service distribution is more equitable, then that can help address the issues you're saying with the kind of skewed representation.
That big word, equity, because it's one thing to have equality. I mean, we have that right now, apparently. But it's another thing to have equity, because with equality, everyone has access to the same things, apparently. Everyone has the right to the same things. But when it comes to equity, how they get those things really is the problem. Right. How difficult is it to get those things? Because according to the law, yeah, they can get this, they can get that, but how hard is it?
Absolutely.
And especially for Black people and other people of color, it's very hard, because it isn't a coincidence that they're the low-income communities.
Definitely.
It isn't a coincidence that they need the most help, so...
And I think a great example of that is higher education, because the systems we have in place right now in terms of how expensive college is, how competitive college applications are, and the way the public school system is set up, it just makes it more and more difficult for people, say, like, their parents didn't go to college, they don't have access to all the resources that a wealthier school might have,
exactly,
such as like SAT prep, an abundance of counselors who have tons of time.
Let me just say, the SAT, ACT, all standardized tests, I think, are racist. No, literally.
I mean, there's been a lot of commentary about that because of the way the education system is set up. Like, certain kids have been essentially preparing for these tests since elementary school.
Oh, yeah.
And it just gives you such a great advantage in college applications.
Exactly. It honestly... There's inequity in almost every aspect of life. And
exactly.
It sucks, but it's the truth.
It's absolutely true.
And one thing it's so bogus to me, this whole taxing system with the public school system, you know what I mean? Like,
right, what many people have spoken on.
Exactly. The low-income communities receiving the least funding, even though funding of public schools does have several components. Right. One of the main ones being tax revenues, and tax revenues of low-income communities being lower, school funding being lower. Tax revenues of white, higher income communities being higher, funding being higher. So who do you think is going to end up being in college? Who do you think is going to want to have a better career and stuff like that? So it's kind of a little pattern going on.
Definitely.
And people don't want to see it and like to blame it on, they don't want to work hard enough. And I see it all the time, especially when I had these like white rich friends back in Yonkers. They would just be like, oh yeah, they just don't want to work hard enough, because I didn't live in the nice neighborhoods. Right. They'd come over and they'd be like, interesting. Right. And it's not because you don't want to work hard enough, it's just a matter of how many resources are you able to access.
Exactly. And like, what are your other responsibilities outside of school? Like that's not even taken into account. Like, I went to the Bronxville public school once. I think I told you this.
Yes.
And I thought it was a private school based on its appearance. And it makes sense to me now, because Bronxville is definitely a very high income community by and large. So it makes sense because of the high property taxes that they would have much more funding for their schools and their gyms. Like, it was like I walked into Hackley. That's what it felt like to me.
Oh my God.
And our school district is very interesting because, as you've mentioned, in Westchester and in like Sleepy Hollow, Tarrytown, we have a clear divide. We have some very working class communities, and then we have like the Manor and the Crest.
Has always been insane to me, how I can be surrounded by all these like people of color, especially Hispanic people, and then walk not even a mile, and then just be like in Whiteville.
It's a very
rich Whiteville.
Very different.
And it's really insane because of the stairs that I also get. They don't come out of their houses, but when they do, it's all about the stairs.
Right.
And it's honestly just insane because why is it that, this goes back to systemic racism, obviously, but why is it that the white people are always the richest people and the black people are always the poorest people?
Right. It's de facto segregation that we're just like seeing even in our community.
Westchester has one of the most segregated communities in America, really.
Yeah, and it's amazing. I mean, I think this is truly good that our school is representing all of the components of the community. One, because the manor and the crest, the high property taxes there, that means that our school is getting better funding.
That's good.
And I think being with people from very different walks of life is just an important part of our education, too, in our community. I think what's unfortunate, though, is that we're seeing that this segregation even persists in the classroom.
Yes.
As you get higher, and many teachers and I know Dr. Smith in particular has really worked hard to make AP and honors classes more accessible for students of color, which is very important work. But we're seeing, like, as you go higher in the classes, it tends to be wealthier and whiter in terms of demographics.
Exactly.
And it definitely shouldn't be that way. Yeah.
And it's not even that, like, they're not able to, people of color aren't able to take these hard classes. It's just
Absolutely
that
not.
they don't feel encouraged enough. And they don't feel smart enough to take these classes because they don't have parents or private tutors or to really tell them, like, you can do this.
Exactly. And, like, in terms of seeing people like yourself in your class, you might be like, oh, I don't have friends in that class. Or, like, I don't fit in that space.
I don't see myself in that class.
Exactly.
Because I know that's the thing with me. Like, I'm in these classes with you, and it's really hard for me because I'm a talkative person, but it's really hard for me to even speak because I just don't see someone that looks like me in there.
Yep.
I think the only black person I've ever had in my class has been my best friend Amira, but that's really been it.
Right.
Like, there are barely any black people, and if there are Hispanic people, it's like 2 or 3
compared to, like, the demographics of our school. It's actually ridiculous.
Exactly.
And I know we've talked about this too, but, like, seeing now during COVID, like, who's comfortable going mic on and really speaking in class, I think that's very telling.
Exactly.
It's the same sort of thing.
Exactly. It's the people who feel the most confident and feel the most confident for a reason, because I speak at rallies and I can't even unmute myself.
It's so true.
So it's like,
yeah, the dynamic is very different, and I think obviously it takes a lot of work to change the culture because it's representative of the larger community. It's like it's a microcosm in here. But I think we really have to work as a community to actually represent who's living here, not just people who have access to more resources just because of the way they're born.
Yeah, and we need to, as a community, like, we have such an advantage being such a small community. I keep saying that word, community, but we have such an advantage being small that it's so hard to get funds for it's so hard to divert funds for certain things, if you know what I mean. Like, it won't require, like, billions of dollars like it will in New York City too.
I see what you're saying. It's a smaller scale.
Exactly. It's everything's done on a smaller scale. So I think, you know, a lot of people might hate this, but we kind of have to divert funds from things such as the police department.
It's absolutely true.
And it's not that we're saying we're resorting to anarchy in Sleepy Hollow and Town, because what are we really being protected from?
It's
one.
very true.
Two, what are we really a community if we're focusing on policing the community instead of actually building it?
Absolutely.
What are we then?
We need more healthcare services. We need more public housing. Like, there are very clear needs in our community that aren't getting addressed. And as you said, like, we have surpluses in the police budget. We have such a high police budget for such a small community.
I know.
And Tarrytown and Sleepy Hollow have separate police departments.
What are they doing writing up tickets? Okay, let me not go too far out of the box, but relating to what Mondaire said, getting money from government, that's one way to do it.
It's absolutely true.
Because we're already in, like, trillions of debt, apparently.
Absolutely.
I don't know where that debt is coming from.
COVID's a thing.
But yeah, exactly. So I think if we really want to put our money where our mouths are, like, that's one way to do it.
Absolutely.
Take funds from things that don't benefit the community and just have negative impacts and divert them towards things that can actually prevent those negative impacts.
And I think that's part that can happen on many levels, like he was saying, and as you just remarked, it can happen from the government level, and we can definitely try and push for it as much as possible on the local level too.
You're so right.
So I think that local organizing in conjunction with getting more progressive and people who kind of have their ear to the ground, so to speak, like Mondaire, I think that's some good steps towards creating sustainable, equitable communities.
You're so right. Thank you so much, you guys, for listening to this. And really, like what Saya said, we all just have to get involved. And civic engagement, especially of the youth, is so important right now. We're more powerful than we think. So we just have to not necessarily fight, but just make our voices heard. Absolutely. And put pressure. Because if you're not doing it, like these administrative things, such as like petitioning your local board of trustees or whatever, you can at least put pressure on them, and that can happen through a variety of ways, especially social media. Or you can email them saying, well, I don't like this, but
and keep showing up.
Keep showing up to your board of ed meetings, your board of trustees meetings, just everything. You can keep track of them by asking like local adults that you know are prominent in the community. It's pretty hard to keep up with them, but once you're in it, once you're in it, you'll kind of not want to leave. You'll get kind of sucked into all these problems you didn't know existed. But yeah, that's really what we want to leave you guys with. Get involved.
Get involved.
Thank you so much for listening.
And we hope to see you next time.
Yes.